Today on Excellent Living, Cheryl Martin on why we can have great expectations that God will prove himself mighty in our lives.
God is no respect of person. He doesn't allow our age. He doesn't allow our color. He doesn't allow our gender. He doesn't allow our education. He doesn't allow our status in society to influence whether or not he's going to do something amazing in our lives.
How big is your imagination? Do you believe that the God of Abraham, Joseph, Moses, and David is ready and able to accomplish great things on your behalf? Hi, I'm Doris McMillan, and you've tuned in to Excellent Living with Cheryl Martin. Today, we share a presentation Cheryl gave at a women's conference in Northern California. She encouraged the ladies with the story of two obscure, ordinary women who watch God do the extraordinary. If you can't listen to the entire broadcast, you can order this teaching called Imagine when you visit our website, excellentliving.org. That's excellentliving.org. Now, here's Cheryl.
I'm certain that if I'd had the opportunity to spend time with each of you, I would hear snippets of your own unique life story. Maybe some of you this morning are without a job and you're not sure when you're going to get back to work. You never expected to be in this position. Maybe you're single with no prospects in sight, only suspects. You just thought you would be married by now. You have a lot of married friends and you long to join their club. Then there are those of you here this morning, maybe you are childless and you desperately want a baby. Or maybe you've been fighting cancer or another life-threatening disease. It's possible you are struggling with a difficult child or husband. You want to talk to the single sisters. These are just a few of the realistic challenges that we are facing this year. But this morning, in spite of those realities, I want you to imagine. Yes, imagine. I want you to form a mental image of our great God doing amazing things in your life. The Bible is full of stories of ordinary people like you and me who had a wonderful, trusting relationship with God. And on a day that they least expected, God showed up and did what some would call the unimaginable. There are two such stories in the first chapter of Luke. And the first one begins with the priest Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. And then the intertwining story of Elizabeth and her much younger relative Mary. Now, in Judea at this time, there were about 20,000 priests, and these priests were divided into 24 groups. Now, each group served twice a year for a week in the temple, performing various duties. One priest was chosen to go into the temple's inner court each morning and burn incense. And this was an extremely high honor. But you can imagine that with so many priests, most of the priests never got the opportunity. And if you did, you could never serve more than one time. And lots were cast to decide who would get this privilege, very much like throwing dice to determine an outcome. Well, that's how Zechariah was chosen to burn incense in the holy place in the temple on this particular day. It all seemed coincidental, except it was a day in the temple that Zechariah would never forget. That's because the angel Gabriel appeared to him while he was performing this once-in-a-lifetime solemn duty, because it's not every day an angel is going to show up when you're going about your business. But Gabriel had a specific message for Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth. Imagine. Now, why am I asking you to imagine this morning? I'm asking you to imagine because, number one, God is in the details. Even in what appears to be an ordinary, mundane day, God is in the details of the ordinary life that you experience every day. Never discount that. Think about it. God had a specific message for one of the 20,000 priests in Judea. God knew Zechariah's work schedule. He knew when his division would be on duty in the temple. God knew in advance Zechariah would be selected when the lots were cast. God knew which day he would be burning the incense. You see, God, unlike most men, but like most women, loves details. God is a thorough planner. He loves making a grand entrance on what appears to be an ordinary day. So, if God knew the intricate details of Zechariah's life, knew just when to show up to change his life forever, this same God knows the intricate details of your life. And he knows when to show up. Because nothing just happens. God is aware of it all. So imagine, God may not come when you expect. He may not be early, but God is never late based on his clock. God is in the details, in the mundane, ordinary details of life. What's another reason to imagine? God is not only in the details, but also God has not forgotten you.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
When you have a track record of loving God and walking in a way that pleases God, God takes notice. And God never forgets your obedience. Maybe your boss has forgotten you. You thought you were going to get that promotion, but you were overlooked. Or your husband and your children forget to say thank you. Or you just want a man to notice you. Remember, God has not forgotten you. How do I know this? Because in Luke 1 verse 6, it says that both Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth were upright in God's eyes, and they observed all of his commandments and regulations blamelessly. They had developed the habit of living to please God, and they did this consistently. Their walk matched their talk. Zechariah and Elizabeth exhibited a life of personal holiness. But even though they had this track record, verse 7 says they had no children because Elizabeth was barren and they were both well along in years. So the greatest longing of their hearts to have a child had gone unfulfilled for all of their marriage. So according to Elizabeth's biological clock, she was past the childbearing years. They were both senior citizens. So they assumed it was too late. But you see, on a day designated by God, because he's in the details, Zechariah found out that God had not forgotten their faithfulness. So Gabriel appeared in visible form and spoke to Zechariah, and this is what he said in verse 13. Don't be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been answered. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son, and you are to give him the name John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. All these years, God heard this couple's prayers. How long have you been praying? God had not forgotten them. He was getting ready to bless them in a big way. Have you been praying for months? For years and years? Have you stopped dreaming? Please don't. God sees, he hears, and he answers prayers in his own time. God is in the details. God has not forgotten you. And a third reason to imagine this morning, our great God specializes in the impossible. You see, when Zechariah heard the news from Gabriel, yes, it was an angel, but he doubted. You know why he doubted? He looked at his reality. He looked at their ages. We're old. They weren't spring chickens. Past the age of childbearing, but Zechariah should have remembered at that moment that the God he served faithfully could do anything. And nothing is impossible with God. What God says he will do, he will do always. Now, when Elizabeth became pregnant, she exclaimed in verse 25, "The Lord has done this for me. In these days, he has shown his favor and has taken away my disgrace among the people." God's timing is impeccable. Have you noticed that God loves to show up on the scene and move in such a way that only he can get the glory? You see, the only way Elizabeth could explain this, God did this. God did this. You see, if Elizabeth had become pregnant during, quote, her childbearing years, she probably wouldn't have said, "The Lord has done this for me." Why? Because it was expected for her to have children. But when that never happened, I'm sure that she and Zach felt some humiliation. Because in that culture, childlessness carries a social stigma. It was seen as a curse. And so that's why she said, "God has taken away my disgrace." If you're going through a deep valley right now and you don't see a way out, and you're serving God, I encourage you this morning to remember our great God specializes in the impossible. There is nothing that he can't do. Look up and not out. Now, what God did for Elizabeth was nothing compared to what he was about to do again. Again, his timing is impeccable. 6 months into Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel got another earthly assignment. This time, Gabriel, I want you to visit Nazareth, a town in Galilee. Again, God is in the details. Gabriel was dispatched. See, when we trust God, we don't have to ever worry about him getting our address confused with someone else's. He's not going to give your man to someone else. He knows where you live. He is very specific. There was no confusion with God. We're able to rest. I'm sending you to Mary. There were a whole lot of Marys. If he passes by, he wasn't yours. God is in the details. I want you to go to Mary, young, poor, female, a virgin, who happened to be engaged to Joseph. All of this was on purpose. lined up with prophecy. Joseph was a descendant of King David. Nothing is coincidental. You know what I love about this story? We can imagine, because God is no respect of person. He doesn't allow our age. He doesn't allow our color. He doesn't allow our gender. He doesn't allow our education. He doesn't allow our status in society to influence whether or not He's going to do something amazing in our lives. I don't care what society says. This is how our God operates. What did Mary have going for her? She lived a life that pleased God. As a teenager, her number one pursuit was God. How do we know this? Because Gabriel in verse 30 said, Mary, you have found favor with God, or you are highly favored. But he doesn't stop there. He gives Mary some incredible news in verse 31. You will be with child and give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. He will be great and called the Son of the Most High. His kingdom will never end. And Mary wondered, well, I'm a virgin. How can this be? And then Gabriel answered in verse 35, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she who was said to be barren, she's in her 6th month. Verse 37 in the Amplified says, for with God, nothing is ever impossible, and no word from God shall be without power or impossible of fulfillment. Ladies, sisters, friends, did you hear that? The same God who caused a virgin to give birth is the same God of each of our circumstances this morning. Imagine, nothing is impossible with God. It's not what you say. It's not what others say about you and your situation. Truth is always what God says. We get on the phone, girl, what you think? What do you think?
Speak truth. Speak truth.
Do we stop and say, God, what do you say? Because truth is what God says. His word is power. Elizabeth was called barren by people. People may look at you. She's not going to amount to anything. How's she going to dig herself out of that hole? And we get all caught up, our minds filled with what other people have called us.
Speak about it. Speak about it.
What if people called you? Elizabeth was called barren, but that's not what God called her. God said, you're a mother. Your house may look barren. Your cupboard may be barren. Your relationships may be barren. Your job may appear barren. But what does God say? Imagine. What was Mary's response to this unbelievable news? A total surrender to God's agenda for her life. She said, one of my favorite verses, Luke 1:38, I am the Lord's servant. May it be to me as you have said, or according to your will, O God, be it unto me. No argument, no protest. God's dream for our lives is always a lot bigger than we can ever imagine. Now, this was not her plan for her life, to face the ridicule of being pregnant before marriage by divine conception. Who's going to believe that? And then what would Joseph think? We don't see her stressing out about, what do I say to Joseph? God is in the details. He took care of Joseph. The God who ordained her life before she was conceived surely could take care of the little things of her big assignment. All she had to do was say, yes, Lord, and agree to cooperate. You know what? When I look back over my life, my biggest struggles have been when I was choosing to go my own way and not release my dreams when God wanted to give me another dream. All the signs were of God pointing me to take another direction. And instead of me saying, yes, Lord, I'm your servant, I want my way. I want that person. I want that job. And it never works. It doesn't bring joy and contentment in our lives. Can you relate to that? When we're struggling against the will of God, when His will and His way are always best. So both of these women, Elizabeth and Mary, said yes to God's agenda. They trusted Him explicitly. They exemplified personal holiness, humility, and they had hearts of worship. Because when we see this, Mary quickly ran to spend time with Elizabeth as soon as she got the news. Now, what I love about this relationship, Elizabeth was much older. She had been serving God longer, but she accepted with joy Mary's more favored assignment. And she looked at Mary and called her blessed. In fact, Elizabeth had such an attitude of humility. She said, what do I do to deserve the honor of having you, the mother of Jesus, come to my home? That's humility on display. She said in verse 45, Mary, you are blessed. Why? Because you believed that what God said to you will be accomplished. You know what I love about this relationship? No rivalry. No competition. Pure joy in how God blessed another woman. So I have a question for you this morning. Are you genuinely happy when God blesses your sister in a bigger way than you? Or is it a fake smile? Are you genuinely happy when she hasn't been serving God as long as you and God blesses her with a wonderful man? Are you saying, God, what's up with that? I know I look better. You don't tell her that. I'm thinner. How did she get that hookup? Can you be genuinely happy? God is watching. Can you be genuinely happy when she has a nicer car, bigger house, great relationship, all the things that you want? Look at Elizabeth. See, this is where God wants us to get as women. We're sometimes wondering why we haven't received those things. It's a heart issue. There have been times God has put me on the side saying, there's some stuff in you that needs to come out before I can really bless you. You have attitude issues. Nobody knows but me. I see them. Genuinely. Elizabeth could have said, Lord, I was happy about my pregnancy till I found out she's going to be carrying the Son of God. I've been walking with you longer. Mary's just a child. She didn't have that attitude. She recognized God's in charge. I'm going to honor the woman that God has honored and placed in this position. He knows what he's doing. A lot of times we're excited about our blessings, but I don't want you to bless someone. I didn't want her blessings to be bigger than my blessings. See, God is concerned about all that cattiness among women. And I pray all the time in my own life. I do. Lord, give me the spirit of Elizabeth. So if you are using another woman in a mighty way, I want to get behind her and encourage her.
We'll have to stop here for today. That was Cheryl Martin with the first part of a presentation given at a women's conference in Northern California. Her theme, Imagine. We hope this teaching inspired you to trust God with the dreams that He's placed in your heart. He is in the mundane details of your life. He has not forgotten you. Faith, believing that God is who He says He is, can move every mountain in your life. If you would like your own copy of this teaching, it's available on a single CD when you visit excellentliving.org. That's excellentliving.org. Just click on Resources and select the CD entitled Imagine. Excellent Living is a listener-supported broadcast. If this program inspires and encourages you to do all of life God's way, would you invest in it today with a donation of any amount? It's tax deductible. You can give online or mail your contribution to Excellent Living, Post Office Box 15285, Chevy Chase, Maryland 20825. That's Excellent Living, P.O. Box 15285, Chevy Chase, Maryland 20825. Coming up next time on Excellent Living, Cheryl Martin concludes her teaching on Imagine.